This week on your Old School RuneScape update, Project Rebalances combat changes arrive. Rogie, who has been with Old School since day one, shares his Project Rebalance combat thoughts. We discuss his journey, NPC defense, item rebalances, and of course, Burning Claws. This is the Old School RuneScape update, episode 30, recorded Saturday, June 1st, 2024. All weaponed out. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Old School RuneScape update. Sirion and myself are here as we are each and every week. Good to have you back.
Hello.
This week, of course, in-game brings us the Project Rebalance combat changes, and to discuss this we have a friend from the podcast many moons ago joining us. His name is Rogie. He plays Group Iron Man. He does PVM in game, and back in the day, you were first on the main update show to help us with our bot coverage way back then. But welcome to the Old School RuneScape update this time.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So give the listeners a bit of a rundown about your RuneScape journey and just how voluminous that's been.
It has been quite a journey. I mean, I've been around for a long time. I guess if anyone remembers me, they'll probably remember me from like the bot busting days, probably like 2011, 2012, 2013 time. We were a content creator primarily around that area, because I think that was what people enjoyed. Obviously, the game had a big cheating problem back then, and something that I took a lot of pride in was being able to help mitigate that problem and also provide legitimate players with something to help them feel like they were getting back at these cheaters a bit with, and I think that's why it became such a big thing. And I think that was, I guess, if anything was my claim to fame, I think it's probably that.
I'd say that's probably what it was, because I know at the time, folks around our community were very demoralized about the bots and whatnot, and we're like, how do we work with this? Well, let's go have a look inside at what some bot busting looks like, and that's where it all began back in the day. But where did Old School begin for you?
Old School began day one. So essentially, Old School had a huge appeal to me. Like, as soon as it got mentioned, as soon as the poll appeared and stuff like that, it was like, holy crap! Like this, this might happen. And this is a huge part of my childhood, because I started way back, early-ish 2000s. Was introduced to the game during school. Which is kind of crazy to think about now that I'm an adult. So to be able to get to experience that nostalgic part of the game again and do things that I remember being in TeamSpeak servers with people doing God Wars and all of that cool nostalgic stuff that just kind of throws you back. And then it was cool, I get a chance to do all of that again, but with other people that have not had didn't get to experience it back then because they weren't high enough level, or they just weren't playing back then, and they've they're playing Old School now and get to so when they were talking about that, and that my first thought was God Wars. So it was all right, cool. My first goal when I started Old School was I need to get stats for God Wars.
Yeah.
That was literally it.
Because God Wars wasn't initially in Old School, but I think they promised it fairly shortly after that it would be added.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, it was September 2013. The game. No, I can't remember the exact month.
Old School started in March 2013.
Yeah. So we ended up with God Wars a few months later. I remember right. But I remember that. Yeah, I think you're right. There was a promise of it. It's do you want this? Because we have an almost finished version of God Wars. And that was a huge appeal for me. And I think everybody kind of wanted it. Obviously, I think there was some people that wanted that OG do we want God Wars? Like, do we want God Swords? Do we want Bandos? Do we want Armadillo? Like that kind of, so there was that aspect, but I think the vast majority of people wanted to experience old school for what it was, and God Wars was part of that experience, me included.
And I mean, when
it's so funny hearing that, the whole thing of like no changes to the game already started in the first month.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because you're walking the line, because I think that old school save was like a few days before God Wars was released on the 2007 server that they had, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah, you get that like taste of it, and then people see it and they're like, might be nice to have, like, because people quickly get sick of like their fighter torso being like the best in the slot, like, chest item. It's like, we're like Bandos doesn't seem too bad.
Yeah, exactly, 100% agree with that. Sirion and listeners know what I'm complaining about with that. But,
yeah.
And then of course there's what is effectively God Wars Chapter 2, and that's when Nex came to OSRS, and I assume that was another big moment for you because you were around for the launch of Nex.
I took a week off work for that, because that was something I wanted to be a part of, being that Nex was like my next, I want to say the next big thing, and that was what the update post was called back when they originally released it in the game. Chris L made the original Nex, and then that was like, being able to do like FFA and get like super valuable drops. I remember back then, like, Pernix's body was like 1.4 bill or something just on its own for some ridiculous reason. So getting that as a drop was just unreal. Like, it was like nothing in the game previously, right? And then we were like, okay, cool. What are they going to do with Nex on old school? Because it was not after EOC came out, it became more of like a solo venture rather than like an FFA one.
Yeah.
So to be able to FFA again with like the old combat style and like, obviously the different gear and stuff like that was a huge opportunity, because it was like, nice, like I get to do all of the stuff that I've done, before, and loved, but to do it again. And then it was like, cool, what are they going to do? Because like, obviously with the original Nex had like 3 armor sets plus the Zarite bow. And we were like, is that going to happen with old school? And I think the original pitch was Virtus, right? And people were like, yeah, it doesn't feel special enough. And then, also we had Ancestral at the time. So it was like, why release Virtus when we've got Ancestral? Because it doesn't fit. So if we did, Torva, it's like an upgrade to Bandos. So it works. So that's what ended up happening. And then like, that whole thing, being able to like FFA, get access to Torva again, and like experience that whole community, because we had like huge Nex FFA communities, PVM communities that were like just centralized around Nex, that kind of was sort of reborn in a way. Like part of the community that I'm a part of now, Nex FFA, some of the people in that community were part of the original Nex community.
Holy cow!
2012. So like it was sort of reborn, and that was like such a cool
circle.
Yeah, it really has. Yeah. But yeah, so Nex was a huge part of the game for me. So
I guess when you look at it then from that perspective, that's the PVM angle on this. Have you dabbled in any of the old school unique raids that are in game?
Yeah, I've done them all. The one I prefer is probably Chambers of Xeric. I just like that, it's unique, like it's somewhat randomly generated. It kind of reminds me of Dungeoneering, which was also a big love of mine.
Okay.
Oh boy. Shane's is looking for.
No, I knew this. I knew this coming in. Okay.
Yeah. So that was. And then obviously you've got the Twisted Bow as one of the big rewards, which is just huge. Like to get a Twisted Bow is just unreal, right? And the raid for me was just enjoyable. Like I really enjoyed it. And then Theory of Blood came out, and it was kind of okay. And I get it. Like I don't like the wipe mechanic, although it does add like a level of risk, right? And it makes it a little bit more difficult. I don't like that you can wipe and then just that's it, like game over. So
That's always an interesting discussion when it comes to RSPVM, is that you can, have combat encounters where you just, you or your group dies and it's just completely done. Whereas, you look at any modern game these days, you really don't have that.
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of strange, and also to like see that mechanic in old school is odd, because like we've never really had, like, I guess when old school like was a thing, nobody thought raids, like it was like, what does a
No,
raid look
how are
like?
you going to do raids with this
Yeah.
combat system, dare we ask?
Yeah, like what does that look like in a game like old school? Like, you can see them in WoW because you've got, like, WoW's a completely different game. Like, it's designed around this intricate combat system, but you've got like old school that is like a turn-based tick system. So it's how does that work? But I think they nailed it. Like, the environment artist, you've got, like, people that design the mechanics of the bosses. Like, I think all of that stuff is like they just did it so well. And Chambers of Xeric, considering Chambers of Xeric was like their first try at it, it was, they did real well with it. I was a little weirded out by the dragon claws as a loot from there, like,
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
boy.
I have a
Yeah.
feeling that'll maybe come up later too.
yeah. But it is what it is. Like, I think the other awards were pretty cool. Like, Twisted Bow itself was, I don't know how Twisted Bow passed a poll, but here we are. It's essentially like a hex hunter bow, right? So, and then you've got, like, the Tombs of Amascut, which is also just an incredibly designed piece of content. Like, it's just incredible. And also they've expanded on these mechanics in the game that you just didn't think were possible, in ways that you didn't think were possible, to do this huge piece of content that just works so well. Like, it's great. But yeah, I don't know. Like, for me,
I
like,
think they deserve credit for teaching that, because, as somebody who has, played with the EOC system for a decade plus at this point, for me, coming over to old school was a bit whiplash in that regard. But when I, did the Rat Boss that came out earlier this year, and, did the stuff with Perilous Moons, that was combat teaching. I, kind of got an idea of how some of that can work. Obviously, I'm not raid level yet, but it's interesting to me as somebody who wasn't interested in this combat system when the whole thing started out, if that makes sense. And you're just adding on to that right now, I have to say.
So in general, like, because like you we're talking about God Wars and Nex, and of course that's like pretty classic PVM. What are you in general like pretty optimistic about the state of PVM and boss encounters? Like, just looking at what kind of content we've gotten recently and.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got a pretty strong team behind that. Like, particularly, I mean, I know that, like, Husky and whatnot have been involved in, like, recent encounters, but you've got, like, Kieran, who's now, like, design director or whatever, and he built, like, the Inferno, and that just, like, when you've got, like, talent behind content like that clearly these guys know how the game works. They know how to make content that is engaging but difficult in ways that you didn't think were possible in an engine that old. Like, can you imagine, right?
Yeah.
If the Inferno had gone into the game in actual, in 2007, nobody would have done
it. like the whole thing with, like, I don't. I mean, obviously, I can scrape through the fight caves and that's it. But like, I know that this this mechanic where you need to stay behind like an obstacle to not get hit, like that kind of original thinking and original mechanic just didn't exist back in 2007. I feel.
Yeah, that was like it. You had like Italy Rock in the fight caves, and that was it. Like, like. Like, and the extent there was no like expectation to like prayer flick or like do any of this like sweaty PVM stuff.
No, exactly. I mean the thing they did with the Mirage phase for the Eclipse Moon, for example. I'm like, how is this in the same engine as
Yeah.
No.
it is incredible what they've managed to achieve, and like, yeah, it just makes me wonder like what would have happened if they'd have put like, the Inferno into the game as it is now back in 2007. Like, it would have been sharply nerfed and like potentially removed, and people would, I just can't do it. Like, but now like people will like try until even as someone that had done PVM for like a considerable length of time, it took me like a month of like, from scratch to like, do an attempt every day or two, like, just to kind of like get as far as I could, and then like if I failed, I would like learn from it, be like, all right, cool, that was the mistake I made, I know how not to do that next time, and then and
then it all just compounds, and then you can get to the end after that.
Yeah, you do kind of need that God run a bit, but it's like with the Colosseum now, right? Like the Colosseum is like the Inferno, but like it just in a different vein. Like it's more randomized because you've got like the the invocations that you choose at the start of every wave that are essentially all debuffs, right? You've just got to pick what you get, and sometimes you get some real crap RNG, and I think that can be the make or break with that, which honestly, like, I don't know if I'm a fan of, because it's sort of, I mean, it does add that extra level of skill, but also kind of removes a level of skill where like you have got to work with what you're given, but also like if you just get like dealt a crap hand,
right?
Like,
is that too random?
Yeah, it's sort of like, like I'm kind of not having fun now because I've got like all of these things just happening to me that I can't control. And it just and then if you get bad spawns, there's all of that stuff. Which is why I'm still working on the Colosseum. I don't know if it's because I've been away from the game and I'm bad at it now, or if it's just so different that I haven't quite nailed it down. So we're working on it.
That's an interesting question to ask, and I guess with that we can kind of pivot into the update of the week with the combat changes. And were there any of the specific combat changes that were mentioned as part of Project Rebalance that you were looking forward to? And in general, how do you feel about these changes?
Honestly, I think it kind of adds like an interesting dynamic to some of the PVM encounters. Not like it doesn't seem to impact bosses too much. I mean, there are a couple of changes that sort of do. I mean, like Nex had a heavy range defense reduced, which was, bolts fall into that category, but people already use like a Zarite crossbow with bolts on Nex. So it sort of just, I guess, just makes her slightly quicker to kill in that respect. But I don't think, some of these are going to impact bosses in the way that like, are going to make a massive impact. Anyway, that might change in the future because they said that they're not done with it yet. But I think some of them will, and that was one of the ones that I kind of noticed. And also Corporal Beast has also had his ranged heavy defense reduced as well, which is sort of like, nobody really uses range on Corp Beast. It's like a,
You want to bring a spear there, don't you?
Yeah. So I think some of these, particularly for bosses, aren't going to have a huge amount of impact, but some of them will. Like, people will find new metas, like, because there might be something that just kind of people haven't figured out just yet. That's like, all right, cool, this is like definitely the way to go, and then people will just kind of do things the way they used to for a while, unless it's not as successful. So yeah, I think it'll depend, and we'll just kind of see over time like what kind of an impact it has. But like for bosses particularly, I don't think much will change for right now. But I think for lower tier stuff, like you've got like elemental weaknesses. I think people might like that might catch on a bit, because if you're camping something, particularly for long periods of time, so I guess at lower levels,
that was my big takeaway from that, is that for low to mid levels, things like elemental weakness are going to be huge.
Yeah, because if you're there for long periods of time, you're camping for stuff. Like it's gonna be like, all right, cool. Like I guess lava dragons is a thing that people camp, right? So now it makes more sense to use water spells, if you cast a magic because like you're gonna do more damage over time. Like it makes sense. And I think that's another thing, with elemental weaknesses is it kind of does make sense. And it's sort of like, it's kind of wild that we haven't had any sort of, elemental weaknesses in the past. You have had some, like, like they mentioned, like damage bonuses, like you've got Ice Demon in Chambers of Xeric, right? So you've got like if you use fire spells on that, you get like a huge damage increase, which makes a ton of sense. But that's like I say new content, it's not new content, it's old as hell. But like in terms of like it's not base game. So it makes sense that does, but it's nice to see them kind of expanding that to other stuff, and it's going to be interesting to see like where players go with that, and like what kind of new metas are formed from it. But yeah, so I think it's just going to be one to watch, because there are people that are smarter than I. So like I've got my eye on stuff for sure, like particularly around end game bosses.
What would you say then is the thing that you have your eye on that could potentially be impacted by this?
Definitely next, but God Wars in particular. I mean, even like Inferno, right? Because I mean, I don't think there are any mentions of the Inferno in the news post, but like ice spells are popular, like for the nibblers. What if it becomes more of a meta to just use like water wave or ice spells in general, because all of the NPCs in there are like fire based, because they have a like distinctive elemental aspect to them, right? Where something, I guess the Colosseum maybe doesn't. I guess you could say that they're sort of desert type things, but it's so maybe I don't know, like it's kind of hard to define like a particular element that would like be effective against Colosseum NPCs, but like with the Inferno, the fight caves, that kind of thing, like you've got that
should
fire
be water, no brain, no brainer there.
Yeah, for sure. So I think anything around that aspect, like I'd be interested to see, because that would like particularly with the Inferno, that would form new metas, and might also change up like the speed run.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because there's a big community around that, like speed running. Like there are some crazy world records there. And if that meta switched, where I guess blowpipe or T-bow or whatever, scythe or whatever isn't as effective in there anymore, and it becomes water spells, is that going to switch up that meta to a point where it's going to have a tangible impact on speedrun records, whether it is going to make the Inferno easier, all of that stuff. So maybe they want to give that more time, because it's a more of a delicate thing, because obviously the Inferno is something that it holds a place in a lot of people's hearts. I think
it's the house on the hill that you don't want to run through unless you have to.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like with the Inferno, they're probably going to be a little more delicate with it, and maybe didn't want to get it in this like first round of changes, because this, I feel like this batch is kind of testing the waters a bit, see what people do and how they react, and what changes as a result. So maybe later down the line, when they're more comfortable with this stuff and like, okay, cool, like we generally like feel good about the direction this has taken the game, how players are reacting to this, and new metas are being formed, and like people are actually using like a wider diversity of weapons, they might then look at stuff like the Inferno, like fight caves and stuff like that.
How do you feel that in particular they're specifically focusing on the air, water, earth, and fire weaknesses, and those same weaknesses don't apply to the ancient spellbook? Because you look at the ancient spellbook, that's what people would always go for. Do you like this kind of, hey, let's pull back to the standard spellbook for a bit?
Yeah, it kind of confused me, because obviously you've got ice spells that are distinctively like it's water, right? So but then it's like, how do you define? Maybe it is just like a starting point, because like I guess it's easier to define like with those elements like where, you know, what's what, because when you go into the ancient spellbook, you've got, you know, ice, shadow, smoke, and blood. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to be like, what is weak to like blood, you know, like if anything, you know, do we just use that as like a like a solely like healing based mechanic, or do we add like, you know, do we have weaknesses for it? But like I feel like with elements it's easier to define those weaknesses.
Yeah.
So maybe
isn't the idea as well that people would just be on, like, they would just camp like the ancient spellbook? So yeah. I think ancient spells needed less because they still had like a good place, right? Like ice spells, blood spells, and like bursting and barraging on Slayer tasks, like all of that.
Yeah.
Like it had a place, right? Whereas the normal elemental spells from the normal spellbook, like when would you use them? There was no use case for them anymore. Whereas now, I think you can go back and actually use them. So the question is whether we need elemental weaknesses for the ancient spellbook in the first place.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah, I mean, you know, people use like shadow spells. I don't know if anyone does Abyssal Sire anymore, but that was something that people use for that. You've got, you know, like you say, you've got like Slayer metas and stuff like that, where people will use like ice and blood spells. So yeah, maybe that's exactly it. Like they just don't need to. I mean, it does make sense for ice to be, you know, to maybe double up as a water weakness, but then I guess at that point you've got to wonder whether it's maybe too powerful, and then people will just like
and then they're back to just using
and then we're back with the problem that normal spellbook is used to.
And you know, when you look at it on from that way, you know, ice and blood I see have very clear cases of where they can be used. I'm a little bit, you know, less in tune with where you use a shadow or smoke spell, but maybe the thing is to just lean into shadow and smoke more and give those more defined things, because I feel like blood and ice are obvious. Yeah,
that might be like a, you know, newer content. Maybe I'm just not like thinking of things that are, you know, utilize those spells right now. And one from the top of my head is definitely the Sire, because I know that you use shadow spells on the tentacle things, if I remember right. I don't know if that's changed. It's been a long time since I've done Sire, but like from what I recall, that was a thing. And I think they deliberately did that to give shadow spells some kind of a tangible use. So it might well be that we see more content that kind of utilizes those spells a bit more in their own sort of way. But yeah, it's an interesting one for sure.
In general, do you think the game needed the changes that have come with Project Rebalance?
I don't think it needed them, but I think it's interesting to see like where they go. Because obviously, like, you know, things get a bit stale over time.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I don't think it hurts to switch up the metas a bit. I think obviously it's, you know, you've got to be delicate, because whenever, you know, people have PTSD from like, you know, they see combat bear and they're like, oh no.
and to be clear, this is not EOC light or anything like EOC.
Yeah.
Like that was my first thought when I saw this, is this another way to frame EOC? And then, you know, diving into a bit deeper, no, it's not. Carry on.
Yeah. So I think, you know, that you've got to be delicate. But it's interesting. Like, I think they're probably just testing the waters with stuff just to see like how it goes, how it changes the game, and if they can add like, you know, because there are so many like, you know, weapons and things. As is the same with RS3 as well, where you've got like, you know, higher tier weapons that are obviously the meta and like they're the ones that get all the use. But then like, you know, you've got another variety of weapons that don't necessarily get like as much use as others, that I think maybe they're just trying to be like, can we add just a little bit more diversity?
That's a good way. That's a good way of looking at it, because, you know, you obviously, like you said, are going to have your highest tier gear, but that doesn't necessarily invalidate the thing in, you know, the 2 to 3 tiers immediately below it, because that's still going to, you know, get you through the vast majority of the content in the game.
Yeah, and I think they did a good
Burning
job.
class, anyone?
Yeah, I think they did a good job with like keeping older gear relevant as well. I mean, when they brought out next, obviously with Torva, it's like there's that level of concern that Bandos is now going to be worthless. But they've kept that useful in the way that you break Bandos pieces to get components, and then you have to use those components to upgrade broken Torva into functional Torva, which is great because it keeps Bandos
that cycle. It keeps
the value. It means that you don't automatically just destroy the lower tier content where you've got God Wars, base God Wars that is more attractive to people. I mean, not even so much like the lower tier level people, right? It's attractive to high level people.
It's a different kind of combat.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, so it keeps it relevant and it keeps people wanting to be like, okay, cool. If I want to if I get a Zami task, or I guess Zami's not a great example, but if you want to go to Bandos or whatever, you're not if I get a drop, it's going to be worthless. You get a chest plate or some tacits, it's still got good value. They're nice drops to get. So, if people are pet hunting, because that's the thing that people do a lot, then, you get other drops, like Bandos pieces, like Armadillo pieces or whatever, that still have held considerable value because they're used to upgrade higher tier armor. You've got your Torvi, you've got your Missouri, and I guess Virtus now as well. But so you've got those upgrades that have kept them relevant, and also your boots as well. So you've got the crystals from Cerberus that keep Ranger boots valuable, because Ranger boots will be worthless potentially if we'd have just I say we. If they'd have,
no, that's fine. That's fine. The community in this.
Yeah, I'm used to being on the other side of that fence. But yeah. So
to be clear here, folks, Rogie does not work at Jagex.
No, I do not. But yeah. So if they'd have released Pegasus boots. I forget their names. I'm confused with the RS3 one sometimes. Without the crystals with the Ranger boots, you'd immediately devalue the Ranger boots that still have this super prestigious, you get that from a medium clue and it's a good amount of money.
I love when they build these ecosystems in, and of course RS3 did that with Invention, and I think maybe what we have here is a more elegant way to do that. And when you look at all the items you're mentioning and everything that was touched with the rebalance changes here, specifically on the magic side, because I know there was a lot of back and forth on that, including everybody's friend the occult necklace. Were there any changes in the gear rebalances for this phase here that really stood out to you, or maybe didn't go far enough or went too far?
I'm not sure, to be honest. It's it's kind of hard to say. I think it's another one of those things that we sort of just need to kind of see over time, and also for future updates and stuff like that. Where that goes and what they do next. So I think it's one to watch, but I think for right now, not really. But they might be more, what's the word? More extreme in the future. So it might be more noticeable. But it's interesting for sure. I'm super keen to see where it goes, and where a high, a super end game stuff goes, and what matters people form from it. So
yeah, okay, that's fair. And the reason I asked about that in particular is because the part of this where the podcast first cut its teeth was that back and forth over the occult necklace and what that meant for Magic, if that was too far in that case. And in reality, I think we got to a very nice place on this, Sirion. I know you were looking at some of the balancing on this, and from your perspective here, and with what we picked up on, are you happy with this? Because I know you had an alternate proposal too.
Yeah, I think we got to a fine place in the end. Like the occult necklace had to change, right? Like that. We discussed that last week as well. It opens up the next slot to other items, and I think in a sense, I think some pieces of gear maybe could have gotten like a bigger boost. Like RMs, for example, feels a little bit So I think if you look at sort of the progression curve, because you had access to your occult necklace fairly early in like your level progression, the mid game sort of got nerfed, whereas the end game, I think, even got a slight buff. So I would have liked that to see more the other way around, right? Like get the combat, like the damage bonus earlier on in the gear progression, but.
All right, fair enough.
It's not terrible the way it is, and I think we just need to see how it plays out.
Yeah. And I guess to Rogie, once everything here lands, which combat style do you have a favorite, going into this? Do you think that's going to change with any of this?
Not really. I have a big preference around ranged. But I mean, everything is kind of interesting now, right? Because you've got like super endgame weapons for all of those styles. I mean, Scythe makes melee interesting. You've got the Shadow that makes magic interesting. You've got the T-bow that makes range interesting. You've got, and then you've also got like, Verse that is, primarily ancients focused and stuff like that. So it's kind of hard to say like, definitely one style, but like I think range for me is preferable just because like I use it for so much. And Nex is another example of that. Is you've got your Zarite bow with the bolt specials and stuff like that. Like and now you've got your quiver from Colosseum. Like it's just a lot of cool stuff going on in that area. But I think every combat style has its own uniqueness, and I think old school's done a real good job of giving that uniqueness to each combat style. Like, because obviously magic was at a bit of a disadvantage until the Shadow came out, and now we've got I guess people call them like the three god weapons or whatever, so yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, I would definitely have to side with range, I think, for right now. And I think in terms of damage output, it's probably up there. But then again, I don't know, because the Shadow is an absolute unit. Like, so it's like, it's difficult. Yeah, I think for me personally, range anyway.
Yeah, and see, that's the reason I ask about that. Is because I always look at this and I say, what combat style can I be most effective with? But the thing I'm learning with old school is that you kind of have to dabble in all three of them. You can lean towards one and two of your favorites, but you kind of got to be proficient at all three. That's something I've learned over the last year and a half or so with that. And I guess to just bring this around, we talked a lot about magic. Do you think ranged is going to be impact too much with the defensive types there, the heavy, light, and standard on that?
I think for right now, not so much. It depends how extreme those weaknesses are. Because it's kind of interesting that they have like a heavy, like a heavy and light difference, and it's interesting to me that bolts and crossbows fall into that heavy,
right?
Because I would have assumed that is more of a regular thing, and then you look at like a twisted bow, and that fits into a regular category rather than heavy, and it's like, well, how does that work? Because you look at the size of the T-bow, and it is quite heavy weapon. But then, I think what they define as heavy is like javelins, like crossbows. What are the bolt shooters called?
Crossbows.
Ballista?
Yeah, ballista. That's the
Okay.
one. Yeah. And then you've got like the twisted bow that falls into the regular. So it's like, how do crossbows like Zarite, crossbow?
Yeah, I think the naming is just unfortunate. Like the way I think about, like if you think about crossbows in real life, right? They're actually pretty, heavy things. Like the concept of the like sort of the hand crossbow, I think in real world history doesn't really exist.
No.
So to me, like maybe a better terminology would have been like the heavy is more like impact, right? Like the things that will an impact, whereas the arrows are usually more piercing. But then you have thrown. I don't know. Like I don't think there's a clean split, and that sort of got them stuck. Like if you see it, what RS3 does, that's also not great, right? Where it's like arrows, bolts, and thrown. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense that they wanted to separate like javelins and darts and knives so that they're sort of all over, like spread out across the three categories. But I'm not a fan of the naming either.
It is a little odd. I mean, maybe that will change.
Does anybody use javelins?
Not that I'm aware of. Maybe when I think of javelins that have a use, I'm thinking of like Morrigan's javelins, but I don't even know like if they get used. I mean, maybe in a PvP capacity, but I don't know.
I remember once upon a time somebody had a stack of rune javelins on the exchange for years, and they never sold. So
I don't think people really buy them, do they?
No. Just thumbing through some of the other quick changes here before we talk about those burning claws. Dragon Warhammer now drops at 1 in 3,000, up from 1 in 5,000. Is this a happy thing?
I mean,
I still think they should have changed it so that the drop rate doubles on task, and then because what you're doing now is you're creating, a better bot farm is what you're creating right now. Whereas if you do it on task, I don't know, that feels like a better solution. But
yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that, because I mean, it's kind of like, it becomes that question like the train, the train has already ran over like 5 people. Like, would you switch the track and have it only hit 1, or would you just have it keep going and get them all, or whatever? Like, so it's like, do you punish the people that have grinded the Warhammer with the old rate, or but I think a task would be a good way to kind of, because then it encourages people to do Slayer, so you like I think that is the better way to go about it, rather than just lowering it. But then it's like, it's a difficult one, because it seems a bit of a weird thing to change now, like, because the amount of iron accounts that have like grinded those for the Warhammer to kind of feel a bit like punished by that change, because it's like, well, I mean, I did it like when it was like an extra 1,000 drop rate like higher. Like, why is it fair that it gets changed now? But yeah, it seems like an odd one. Like, it seems like they're just like, maybe that grind is a bit too painful, but then it's like, it's like other things that have been changed in the past, like after kind of too long.
Yeah,
where
I know exactly
so
where
many
you're going
people.
With that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know. It is hard, but I do agree. I think Slayer would have been a good way to go about that.
All right. Well, you did mention the burning claws earlier. And in particular, while Guthix sleeps, and it was weird to you that they came from Chambers of Zarek, and of course we didn't have tormented demons at the time. But Burning Claws, we do have some updates on that this week, lowering the tier requirement of that to 60, which they say better reflects the intention of them sitting between the Dragon Dagger and the Dragon Claws with this. And I guess the question, for you is that while Guthix Sleeps is such an iconic quest, do any of the weapons or rewards in here speak to you?
Honestly, it was mostly the claws.
Okay.
That was the big one, right? The I think caught everyone's eye a bit. The other stuff is interesting too. Like, they're talking about the scorching bow. I don't know how I feel about the claws though, but like,
what made them stand out to you?
I mean, they're just interesting takes, right? Like they seem like sort of like mid-tier weapons, but like, yeah. I think they also want to give tormented demons like people a reason to kill those, because I mean they're not the easiest things to kill,
no.
if they, providing they have the same mechanics as they used to. So I guess they want to give people a reason to do it, because I mean back then, like when it was originally released, you had like the dragon armor pieces, and then you had the claws, and the claws were the big ticket.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I think they're just trying to give like a reason, and these weapons will have, like with them being like a mid-tier thing, give people somewhat of a reason to do it. But I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure the burning claws have a place. I think that's maybe just like, it seems like a bit of a nostalgia thing where it's like, all right, we feel like it should drop a set of claws.
What about their lean into accuracy about how the chance to inflict burn is dependent on the accuracy roll?
Yeah, I mean that could be interesting. Yeah, I think we just, like, it needs to be careful with power, because if they end up being more powerful than some of the higher tier weapons with the burn, because I mean there are ways that you can increase your accuracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, is it going to be better to use these weapons than some of the higher tier ones because of the burn status that it inflicts? Like, I mean, it is a cool idea, right? Like, but yeah, I think it's a delicate one, because for the sake of wanting to give tormented demons something of a, something to drop, I think they need to be careful not to, give them something too powerful. I mean,
right, so that it doesn't become the place that everybody goes after the quest, and that's the item.
Yeah, and I think the boat is kind of sailed with the claws as well. Like, so, those were put on in Chambers of Xeric, and like I think,
would you have moved them back to the tormented demons?
I don't know, because then you also, like, you kind of punish like iron accounts and like people that have grinded Chambers. Like, it's another one of those delicate situations where it's been there for too long. So it's sort of like, the game's different. It's like, it's not the same game, right? So if you move them, then you kind of punish, not necessarily punish, but impact those people that have grinded Chambers of Xeric, and they just kind of have their place there now. Like, obviously they didn't at the start, because it was like, well, why do they fit here and not? Why don't we just do Tormented Demons or whatever? And then because if they'd have done Tormented Demons around the same time, like if they released Chambers of Xeric and then a few months later done,
then that's a different conversation entirely.
Yeah. But it does seem a bit like they're just trying to put claws on the drop table because that's what they used to have, and it's a bit not like it sits nostalgically with some people. It does with me a bit as well, but I'm not sure I want them there just to have for the sake of having them personally. But
I think for me, like, the biggest thing would be to be like a more accessible special attack weapon, right? Because I think that's the thing that people use claws for, and I don't know, like, I use the Abyssal Dagger right now, so when they say like it sits between like the Dragon Dagger and the Dragon Claws. I'm like, yeah, but like there's the Abyssal Dagger as well, which is like a better Dragon Dagger. So
yeah,
the whole thing starts feeling a little bit like a mess. And the Abyssal Dagger is level 70, by the way. So like the whole tier thing becomes a mess. Like in a sense, Dragon Claws feel like they're way too powerful for like being tier 60 to begin with.
Yeah.
Like I would almost say that the better solution here, and this is gonna get me lynched, is to basically upgrade is to upgrade like the Dragon Claws from the Chambers of Xeric into, I don't know, Twisted Claws. I don't know. Give them a different name, make them at tier 70 and keep them otherwise the same, right?
Yeah.
All the purists will be hating me right now. And then just add Dragon Claws as a new thing at level 60 to the Tormented Demons and make them, you know, more tier 60 like, and you would solve the entire problem.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, right? Like that's then for that you need like a level of courage because you're breaking some things, but that then isn't done.
Yeah.
And we end up with sort of a half-arse situation that probably makes things worse for everyone. So
yeah,
it's probably a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because you'll never please everyone. So it's like,
no, I know.
That's what surveys are for.
Yeah, even
and polls. Yeah, I know. But just to close the loop on the rewards here, of the untradeable items, which of those resonate with you, if any? Firelight, the Scorching Bow, or the Ignited Staff?
Yeah, I'm not sure, honestly.
Because they're all heavily, slanted towards demon and whatnot. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, it does. With them being untradeable, I think that's interesting as well. Because it does give like Irons like a reason to go up there and get those. It's like, like if you have the tier before or whatever, it makes you have a reason to complete that quest to go up there and get them. But also, like, I guess, people that want to do the collection log stuff will also do that. I don't know. Like, it's, yeah, I don't think either of them particularly resonate. It's just it's just an interesting take on, like a mid to high tier weapon for all three styles, and it's just, I'm a little concerned about that burn mechanic and how that's going to impact higher tier content. And
because we don't have any numbers on that, do we? About how strong that's going to be? Yeah,
that's the thing. I'm a little concerned about it.
They say 175 damage over 3 hit splats, but that's for the special attack on that. Yeah. But I don't necessarily know that that's referring to the burn there, is it?
Yeah, it says burn is rolled for each hit splat. The chance to inflict burn scales dependent on the successful accuracy roll, 33%, 66%, and 100% respectively.
You're right, that could be a bit of a dark horse.
Yeah, the target will be dealt 10 damage over the course of 40 ticks, 1 every 4 ticks, and can stack up to 5 times, so 10 damage. Yeah, so it's like, how long does the burn last? Does it last 40 ticks, or does it last longer, or like, what's the cooldown on applying burn?
Right.
Like, can you get back to back? But so I think there's all of those technicalities that need to be considered, and it's like, because it could just be better like to use like something with burn on it than like, for example, I guess I keep using Nex as an example, but at Nex, if
that's
you were
fine,
to like,
that's your jam.
Yeah, like, so if you had like one of these Scorching Bows as like as alongside your Zarek crossbow, just every like so often just shoot Nex once with the Scorching Bow to like apply a burn, providing that damage counts as your damage. It might become meta to have that as like, even if it's not best.
Oh boy, like, Switchscape.
Yeah, exactly. So it could go down that route where people just have them as like side weapons to just like inflict burn to have that as a damage over time whilst they, so
how big? Sorry to interrupt. How big is Switchscape in old school high-end PvM? Like switching weapons and whatnot?
Yeah, pretty big, I would say already. Yeah.
I've seen plugins that help with highlighting the gear that you need to switch to in your inventory and things like that. So I know it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big one.
Well, as they say, fun shall now commence. I believe that pretty much is bringing us to the end of the show here, unless you have any other stuff you'd like to dive in on, Rogie, before we wrap here.
No, I think I'm pretty
right.
Weaponed out.
Yeah, sounds good. So, that's a good way of putting it, all weaponed out after the Project Rebalance changes. Because this has been a venture for us, and I'm just glad that it's in the game and we can carry on with our lives at this point. And maybe folks feel the same way with the podcast. But it was wonderful having you on the show. Thanks for joining us. Good to talk to you again on voice after all these years.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. It was I was sat at work when you sent me the message. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I was like, that sounds like it could be fun. Like, I've not really talked about RuneScape in any. I was a little nervous, to be honest. I've not really talked about RuneScape in any sort of like detailed game design or like functionality capacity in a long time. So I was like, oh no, like am I up
it's
to
okay
scratch?
It's okay. We're very mid-leveled here, so we weren't gonna make you explain the very core aspects of it. But thanks for joining us on the show. Sirion, anything from you before we depart?
No, thanks for all the insights. It's always good to hear from someone who just sees the game through like a different lens, right? Like,
and has been there since the very beginning.
Exactly. Yeah.
But we'll be back next week, folks, for another episode of the Old School RuneScape Update. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you then. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.